So we're live. Okay, I'm gonna do this because this way I'm here beneath the logo. I haven't learned to do this yet here. Alana, so this is going for people who are watching. We're live, and we're going to be live recording a future episode of the podcast. But if you're watching today, for those of you who will be, or if you'll be watching later on YouTube or whichever platform, this gives you a chance to actually comment on the episode. And me, Alana, are, for example, active on LinkedIn. Right, I think I've seen you there.
Yes.
So any comments, be it from people who are watching right now, or if you're watching later on, we'd love. We're people who like to help people. We're people who like to help PhDs be happy in their careers, and
Yeah.
I think that's a very important point. And people who like to help, especially people who are on LinkedIn and like to help, we're very good at responding and at answering your questions. And in my case, even maybe bringing your question to a future episode. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
So in the meantime, I don't see if anyone is watching and can say if everything is going fine. I'm going to do a couple of checks here on my side, and just to see if the feed is running smoothly on the different platforms. But eventually, we're going to start our discussion. Just give me a second here. Like this. Okay, so we are live on Twitter, that I can tell. And same thing, at least on LinkedIn. And now the last check I need to do. Sorry, everyone, but it's... And we're live also on YouTube. Perfect. Alana, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
I'm going to go and find the bio that you had sent me. Because the way I do this is that we in this first part, I'm checking that the feed is going well. We chat a little bit, and then eventually we'll start the actual recording for the podcast.
Okay.
And I always like to have a little bio of the person, of the guest. In the meantime, so you were telling me, where are you located? I'm in Montreal, Canada. So
okay, I am in Nebraska, U.S.
Okay, and so what type of weather does that mean at this time of year?
So we're in the 40s to 60s degree Fahrenheit, not Celsius.
Fahrenheit.
Sorry.
Okay, Celsius would be
yeah. I was like,
extreme
no,
for
that's
now.
wrong. So I don't know what that translates to in Celsius. But yeah, so we get the colors changing in the leaves, and we usually get really random snowstorms in October, but we haven't this year, thank goodness. So
Okay.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, here it's been, so the cold has been a little bit late to arrive.
Okay.
And the first freezing, etc. I think there are records being broken every day of how late it's arriving. But it's what's happening these days. We can't, at least in terms of climate, we can't really predict so much, or at least we can't depend on past experience so much as we have in the past.
Yeah.
All right, and so Alana, I think we can start. I think things are rolling on all places. I just wanted to tell everyone that Alana is working actively towards this mission of helping people figure out their careers after research, and this is why we connected, and this is why she's here today. So what I'll do now is I'll actually start the recording of the podcast, give you her short bio, and then we'll go from there. So welcome to this week's episode of Papa PhD. This week I have with me Alana Rister. Actually, I never asked you, Alana. There's different ways to pronounce it.
It's Elena.
Elena, there you go. See. And because this is a live recording, I can now repeat everything. Good thing. And I had thought of asking you first and forgot. Okay.
It's okay.
Elena, perfect. Welcome to this new episode of Papa PhD. Today I have the pleasure of having with me Alana Rister. Alana earned her PhD in chemistry in 2019. Since then, she's been a postdoctoral scholar and research specialist. However, throughout her experience, Elena realized that many researchers were stressed because they didn't have support and felt overwhelmed in their research. So she created the Science Grad School Coach to help support researchers and help them learn exactly how to complete their research with more confidence and less effort. Isn't that something we all want, Elena?
Yeah. Thank you so
Welcome,
much.
and
Yeah.
thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. So yeah, I started the Science Grad School Coach mainly after I was started being a postdoc, and I really wanted to help other people with their research and realizing like how much I struggled when I first got started in grad school, and
Mhm.
then wanting to like having to learn it by trial and error and wanting to like kind of not have that happen for everyone else. So that's kind of why I started this business, this brand to, help other people with
Mhm.
research and then being able to like develop those skills. And then once you're out of your PhD or schooling, like those skills are just as important in most, like whether you're in academic or in industry, research skills can be very important for a lot of different jobs. So
Mhm.
yeah.
No, and it's funny because it's kind of the mission statement of Papa PhD too, and it stems from the same thing is, I hit some snags during my path. I don't want other people to hit the same snags.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
so
I think,
yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, but I think I was going to ask if you had something to add, like one or two things to add about who Elena is based on what I said in the beginning. But you can integrate that in whatever you were going to say also.
Yeah, I mean, so I got my PhD in analytical chemistry
Hmm.
in 2019. I started in 2016, graduated 2019, and I specifically focused on mass spectrometry research.
Okay.
And then afterwards, I went and did a postdoc in biology. So, very different than what I did my PhD in. And that was like a really important transition there. And
Mhm.
then um, I became a research specialist, specifically doing like proteomics and metabolomics work. So I kind of went back into mass spectrometry after that.
Okay.
So yeah, I've kind of been in like multiple different fields and disciplines with research and, you know, kind of having to relearn a field and do all of those things over and over again and being able to market yourself and saying, okay, I know your field is different than mine, but I can actually be good at this job,
Hmm.
and things like that.
Excellent. So you just used the word marketing, and if there's one thing that I can tell, like for sure, that I was not taught during grad school was marketing myself.
Right. Yeah.
Is that one of the things that people who you work with that is that one of the big challenges? Learning to have to say, look, I'm good at this, and I can be useful here and here, versus just focusing on your skills.
Yeah, so when I started, like throughout my entire PhD, like I think maybe a couple times people were like, "Yeah, you need to learn how to market yourself," and like that was
Mm.
the extent of the advice given in that.
You need
So
to. Okay.
yeah, so like I was really, really bad at it, and I think I just kind of learned it a little bit through like intuition, like being able to respond to people's questions and be like, okay, well, I might not have that exact skill, but I know how to do this and it
Hmm.
relates. And so that was kind of how I learned it. And then when I actually started building this brand, I had to learn a lot about marketing so that
Of course.
someone actually knows who I am so I can actually help people. And I think now that I've kind of retroactively applied what I've learned in building a brand to how to kind of brand yourself and market yourself. The skills there are very similar, and it's important that people actually know about you if they're going to hire you and
Hmm.
know the things that you want them to know and what you're actually capable of. And so having to like learn that, I definitely didn't get that in grad school. And I think when I was first applying, I didn't, get a lot of great feedback in my applications initially, and I've kind of had to learn that through actually marketing a brand and then kind of taking that back and
Hmm.
marketing myself.
So a question for you is,
Mhm.
because in the thinking of, and I finished my PhD in 2010, a little bit a little bit earlier, but um, people might have said, why are you doing this? This is not necessary. So in your opinion, what is the upside of focusing some of your time into learning how to market yourself, even if you're in grad school? What can it be useful for?
Yeah, so I think starting in grad school to learn how to market yourself, how to get some form of presence and things, it's really useful for anything you want to do during grad school or even after grad school. So like I think we talk about this a lot in like networking. Like everyone
Hmm.
knows it's important to go network, which I was also really really bad at in grad school. But I remember there was this, so a lot of my initial research was based on someone else's kind of, they did some initial stuff and then I kind of
Hmm.
continued it, completely different lab and everything, and I was like so scared to go talk to these people. And at a conference that person ended up coming up to me and was like talking to me, and like we've actually like kept in touch, and he was like, oh yeah, we're not pursuing that anymore, so like I'm glad someone is and stuff like that.
Okay.
And it's like making sure that even as a grad student you're portraying what you want to portray. You're
Hmm.
easily able to be found. If someone sees you at a conference and was like, she might know the answer to this, then they know they have a way to find you to start that conversation. And then what you're basically creating contacts, and then they might recommend you for to someone else who's looking for something. And so
Hmm.
it's like marketing is really just being like, this is what I'm capable of, this is what I'm good at. I want to let other people know about this so that if I can help them, whether it's, through a job, through a brand or anything, if I can help them, I want to make sure that people know about me so that I can get those jobs. I can get that, be able to help people.
Mm. So it's super interesting, because now having a YouTube channel and a podcast,
Yeah.
I keep now I'm trying, learning things. I keep learning things to learn how to do this the right way. And one of the things you hear about is discoverability and findability. And
Hmm.
it seems to me that you're talking about the exact same thing,
Yes.
but in terms of being a young researcher, of
Yep.
being discoverable, being findable. How do you, what are things that you've learned that people can do to be more findable, to be more discoverable as a young scientist, when usually you feel like, oh, I still don't know anything, I'm
Hmm.
no one, these people, like you said, I am afraid to even talk to them because they're so, they're
Hmm.
so big or important in my field. How does
Right.
that work in practice?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of the similar things that you kind of learn in building a brand. So, like you said, in a YouTube channel, right? Like, so social media is a huge thing, right? So, like, I love when I'm on Twitter and I see people going, here's my new paper. Like, this is what I did, right? And then I always like retweet those because there's someone else that might not find that paper for 4 to 6 months that could be finding it today, could be helping their research. And potentially they're like, oh, wait, you can do this. I need this in my lab. Are you
Hmm.
ready to graduate? Can you come postdoc, or can you, get this job or something like that? And so I think discoverability, I believe in like having a website as a grad student. So that was not something I did.
Me
But
neither.
either, yeah, right. Like we didn't think about these things. No one
At
told us
all.
about it. Um, so having a website, or at least having a very updated LinkedIn, which my LinkedIn is not updated. I'm going to be honest. It's not.
Mhm.
It was when I was on the job market, but now that I'm not, I haven't quite updated it yet. But at least having a place where you can direct people and say, this is kind of my tangible experience. And so I know Brittany Trin on Twitter and Instagram, I think
Mhm.
she does a lot about helping grad students get a website up that's really simple to be able to market their skills. And so that would be a good connection on like if you're trying to get a website up. But then creating some form of online presence and continuing that presence in person.
Mhm.
So especially like with virtual conference right now, it's like sort of in person, but not really, right? So I think creating at least one form of social media can be really good to just be like, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm capable of, but you can do it in the most natural way, so that instead of people, when they see a CV and just see, okay, this, they can actually like find you through different sources and be like, oh wait, like this is who she is as a person. And I think that, because I think personalities, like people look for personalities, like they look for
Yeah.
skills, but they also look for personalities. And that's not what we're taught as PhD students. We're taught you got to have the most publications, you got to have all these skills, and that's the only way to get these jobs. But then you go and look, and like most of my questions I got asked in interview were more about like, what is my personality? How do I relate to other people? And so if you can showcase that and just be an authentic person, you might just find that those job opportunities are actually coming to you, instead of, because you're discoverable, right? If someone's searching for something, maybe they stumble upon your Twitter, or people are retweeting it and someone else finds it. And academic science Twitter is a huge thing, you know? So yeah, did that answer your question? Sorry.
It did. It's awesome. And actually, Twitter is one of the the least difficult ones to hop into, because there's
Yes.
not too much commitment. Building a website, depending on what type of project you're on and how intensive it is, it could be the bar could be a little bit high for that. Although I would say any time invested in that is very well invested, and and maybe worth losing some losing some time on something else to do that. But what I was gonna ask was the following. So you kind of really what I'm hearing is you are as a young researcher, you are beginning to be a content creator. It's scientific content. You need to be discovered. Now, in my case, I remember that if I had wanted to do that, there would have been stuff that I was working on that I would not have been able to publish for reasons. Are there workarounds? Can you still be present if, for example, you're working on something that another group is working and you can't really talk exactly about your research? Is there another way, in your experience, to be present if that's the case for you? Because I imagine it's the case for a bunch of people, especially I remember in my domain, life sciences, it can happen a lot.
Yeah, I think, you always want to kind of be protective of data that's unpublished, right? And I think you don't want other people seeing that data before it's got a publication and it's cited to the right sources and everything. But I think like you can still, right? Like if you created a website, right? Like I would include your research interest on there, maybe like past projects being, because like there's so many times if you go to like past projects, but also you can talk about what you're working on now, right? Like if you go to a conference, not everything there is published, right? But you probably don't want to show figures or things like that, but you can talk about general interest or general like hypotheses that you're trying to see and things like that. And I think on Twitter, or on my favorite social media platforms, Twitter, like if you want to connect with me, come find me on Twitter. But you can be a person and talk about, oh, I found this really cool fact today, like I want to share it or stuff like that. And then other people are going to be like, oh, she's like learning and stuff like that, and she's in a nearby field to mine or something like that. So I think just like being an authentic person in what you share. And then also, just if you can't share your specific results yet because it's not published, like that's fine. You can still talk about interesting things in your field, or even sharing other people's stuff that's in your field and being like, oh, this is an interesting take on that. I think all of that kind of helps you to become discoverable. And then as you get later into your PhD or whatever, schooling you're in, like hopefully you'll have like some things published, or at least you'll be able to talk a little bit more broadly about like what you're doing or what you found, or at least like techniques that or research skills that
And now this makes me think of, because you were talking about your example, and you said that at the beginning in grad school you didn't have any skills on that side, but then eventually you developed them. What was the path towards you learning these skills, and actually maybe an example of using them and having an aha moment of, oh, I did this and this interview went so differently than the previous one?
Yeah. So can I give like two examples
Sure,
that I think are really interesting? Okay. So I was in a postdoc. And then I actually started looking for jobs because my postdoc funding was ending. And there were a lot of jobs I applied to, but I had 2 interviews, and both of those interviews were like, one was a Thursday, one was a Friday.
Okay.
So they were like happening at the same time. One was for industry, and it was on like protein biochemistry, which I had never done. And one was like a postdoc that was in like my field. So doing mass spectrometry work. And it was really interesting because like I had been developing these skills and I had to market myself in 2 completely different ways. And so when I was in this one interview for industry, and I was, talking through and having to learn to like ask questions that kind of showed my personality and all of these things. And we were like talking, and I was like, I also had to learn, like, whenever you're like interviewing, when they ask you a question, like give an answer to that question and then share an example or a story about that answer to the question. Because like people remember stories, we learn through stories.
Of course.
And one of the things I was like talking, and I was like, yeah, I'm really interested. And I was like, but honestly, I don't have a lot of experience in this technique. And they were like, you have clearly shown you know how to do research. We can teach you the technique. That's not the problem. Like I want a PhD who's going to be able to do research, be able to solve problems. I can teach you any technique after that. So that was like a light bulb that went off in my head, in that I don't need to know every single thing on a job listing, because I have a fundamental skill that as long as I can show that I can do that skill, people are willing to teach me what I don't know. Then on the other side, like the postdoc, I had all the skills. And so I had to kind of market myself because it was like applied to a slightly different thing, which everything that I've ever done showed that I didn't have a ton of interest in that thing. So I had to actually market my interest in that interview and be like, I'm mainly interested in the fundamental analytical chemistry, and I love applying that to any problem, right? So it was having to market, that I am actually a good fit for the role because of my interest in it. And I actually got both job offers. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so it was like a really interesting time. But yeah, like that's having to learn, what do you need to be marketing at that time? And even when I didn't think I was marketing, like I didn't think I was like, in the first interview, I never was like, oh yeah, these are all my research skills. I just, had this authentic personality, and I was like, oh yeah, this is what I know about this. And they could see through that I had these research skills and that I was capable of that.
This is super interesting, because I think now you're talking even of the next step, which is applying whichever efforts you've been developing of marketing yourself, which in a way means having stories to tell about your
Right.
your journey and your journey as a researcher. But you went to the point where now you have people you need to talk to about this in different spaces, so you need to tailor the way you're
Yes.
going to talk to them. It's super, super interesting. And it's interesting that you got both offers. So clearly you prepared well for both.
Yeah, I mean, and I think like that was because I had to give a presentation in both interviews, and they were back to
Okay.
back.
Oh, wow.
And it was like a research presentation. So I like gave a mix of like my PhD defense plus a little bit from my postdoc. And when I was like going through it, my first practice run, I tried to create the same presentation. And then I was like, okay, I'll just make quick tailors to the 2 different things. And when I was going through my practice run, I was like, I can't even get through this practice because like I went about it all wrong. Like I need to create a presentation with the audience in mind, because right, like one, I'm talking to mass spectrometrists who know all about this, and the other one, I'm talking to people who don't know anything about mass spectrometry. So I'm like, this is just wrong. So and it was like overall, it was probably small tweaks that I had to make, but it was several of them, and it was the approach I went into it. And I think like that's so important in everything you're doing. Whenever you're submitting to a journal, applying to a job, anything like that, you have to keep your reader in mind, and you have to tailor what you're doing to them. So you can have an authentic presence, in your LinkedIn, in your social media. When you go to conferences, you have an authentic presence, right? But then when you're in those individualized events, or you're submitting to something specific, you have to tailor that presence to what they need to know and to what they're going to be comfortable with. Because if you talk above them, they're just going to be like, okay, I didn't catch anything. So
Mhm.
making that tailoring is so important in everything you do with marketing yourself.
Super interesting. Now, and it makes total sense to me. Now, one thing that I'm because I think it's changing, especially because of this podcast thing. But I'm gonna say I've been an introvert more than maybe I am today. I think now that I can say ambivert. There's different ways you can go talk about it. But uh, in the past, I've had moments where I've had to learn, and in jobs that I had even before the PhD, to how to be in front of an audience who
Mm-hmm.
even could be hostile at that point in that job, but at least that I don't know, that doesn't know me, and it wasn't easy at first. And I wonder whether through these years, you also had something you did to go from the Elena during grad school to the Elena at first postdoc, second postdoc, in terms of learning how to present yourself, learning how to act, how to express yourself, and how to be in a setting where the people in front of you might be evaluating you in
Mm-hmm.
any sort of way.
Yeah, so I would say that the Elena today is very different than grad school Elena, even though that was like what 2 years ago. So I am also very introverted, and I think the biggest thing that is like changed how I perceive things is starting this brand and having to do
Mhm.
something that was so outside my comfort zone. But when I was in grad school, I was like my mentality was the whole hustle culture. Like when I first started grad school, I was like, okay, 12-hour days, like this is awesome. I'm going to be a scientist, all of this stuff, right? And I think like going through grad school, I started realizing, okay, this isn't as cool. Um, and I started realizing how to do research. So I started spending less time in that. And when I started spending less time in my research, I started spending more time figuring out who I was because I was really, really uncomfortable with who I was in grad school.
Mhm.
And so by the time I had graduated grad school, I was kind of figuring out myself, but I was still like, I literally left the day after I graduated grad school, drove across the country, and started my postdoc 3 days later.
Oh
So,
wow.
like, still kind of a little hustly. I've gotten better since then. And then things had happened where, because I wanted to be faculty, right? Like I wanted to have a lab. I am like, it was like such a dream because I thought, my entire, like I wanted my students in my lab to like never have to feel inadequate because I was going to give them all the training they needed to
Mm.
do their research and it was going to be awesome. And things outside of my control basically made that path impossible. So I had to really come back to what do I love? What do I want to do with my life? And that really made me want to slow down and want to really figure out myself. And then I made the switch from wanting to give the answers I thought people wanted to giving my real self. And so that was like the biggest switch between when I started my postdoc and then when I did those interviews I talked about earlier,
Mhm.
because I was just like, this is who I am. And if you don't like who I am, then I'm probably not going to like working for you. And that switch was such a huge thing for me because, like, you might not like my brand, and that's perfectly fine because I'm probably not going to be the best person to help you if you don't like my brand, but I'm going to be me.
Mhm.
And I think that's such the same thing. Like, I think every scientist is basically an entrepreneur, right? They come up with an idea, they work on that idea, and their whole goal is to either understand something or help people, right? Like,
Mhm.
that is being an entrepreneur. So when you show up authentically as yourself, and you're going to grow and develop over time. So your authentic self is actually going to change over time. But if you're authentically you, you're going to start getting the experiences and the jobs and the offers that actually match with you and make you happy overall. And so I
Mm.
think that's like the biggest thing that changed from grad school me to like now me, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I want to apologize. I have a button here with which I can mute my mic because my neighbor seems to be hammering something into the wall. So there might be something that comes into the recording, but we'll see. We'll see if we're lucky. But it makes total sense, and there's part of it. Part of it is practice, I imagine, because even Elena today and Elena 1 year ago, you can see for sure. I'm sure you can see differences. But there's definitely a question of mindset, change of mindset, right? You said it at this moment where I understood that I just had to be myself, and that because this way I wouldn't be. You didn't say it like that, but you don't want to be setting false expectations of the people who want to hire you. And once you kind of fall into that meanness, and that's what's important. It can be kind of a whole change in perspective that can even change the way you interact with people, for sure.
Yeah.
I agree. It's not easy though for everyone to find that voice, right?
No, I mean, it wasn't easy for me, right? Like I was so like, if you go back on my channel and watch like my very first videos, they are so bad. And I leave them up there. I wanted to take them down so many times, and I leave them up there primarily because if anyone else that like wants to start this journey, I feel like they need to know, like, people who have a following now, have actually like have people that they're helping. Like, we didn't start where we are now. And I think that's such a huge thing, because like my videos are bad, and even like 6 months into it, they got worse before they got better, right? Like, that's just the like I didn't know how to work a camera. Like, it's just bad. But I think it's like, one, I think they were helpful, right? And they show my journey. And my journey even existed before my channel, right? And so I think extroverted people tend to have a little bit easier time just showing themselves. Where like I second guess like everything I say, pretty much. And like I always have like yeah, and I always have like so much like like even this podcast, I was like, okay, an hour before I was like, okay, let's ramp up the anxiety, right? And that's just like right, like that's who I am. But I've kind of learned to embrace who I am, and I think that comes in so many different things. Like, one of the things is embracing the fact that like I'm a super night owl, and I always used to be like, okay, Elena, like successful Elena will figure out a way to wake up at 7 a.m. and like get her life together. And that's just like not who I am. And so when you're going against who you are because you think that's what's going to make you successful, you tend to just keep falling even farther and farther behind. Whereas as soon as you embrace who you really are and go, okay, that job, even though I meet all the qualifications, I know I'm going to be miserable in it. So I'm going to go for the job that, even if I don't meet all of those qualifications, I know I can do good. Like, I know I can be trained, and I know I can do well in it. And that's going to come across in your application. That's going to come across in your interview. Like, go for those jobs, even if it's not like, oh, I fit all of the qualifications for it. Like, FYI, most people who start as an entrepreneur do not fill all of the qualifications as an entrepreneur.
No, and yeah, anyone that is applying to a job also don't expect that if there's a couple of bullet points in there that you simply don't fit into, that's just indicative of what the organization wants, of what
right.
of the needs of the team or the project. But you can't, it's really hard to fit in all the little bits and pieces that they ask. So yeah, don't put the pressure on yourself, or even sometimes don't lose the opportunity of applying to something just because you're not the perfect candidate. No one is. And who knows, maybe you actually are, just because of your story, because of your interests, and that only shows once you go and interview and see the people.
Right.
But it does need this question of stories, especially if you are more of an introvert. It takes some work preparing them too, and I think you probably help people with that. I want to ask about your experience working with people and actually I'm going to share the link for your podcast down here, sciencegradschoolcoach.com/podcast. For people who are watching, it's just a little marquee here below our image. Is the URL okay? I'm
Yeah,
seeing.
yeah,
Yeah,
you're
it's
good.
perfect. But I think one thing that you've said, and you've mentioned actually brand a couple of times, although we didn't talk specifically about branding. One thing that's important to me, at least, about this conversation is that looking at the time where I was in grad school, first we didn't talk about that branding. Your branding as a grad student, it wasn't a
Right.
thing. But even today, I feel that there might be, and it depends also in different labs, different cultures, different countries. Even there can be kind of people can balk at the expression
Hmm.
because it sounds selly, it sounds
Yep.
commercially. But I think some you may not want to be selling things for your profession, but
Hmm.
there's good things in marketing, in industry, and in sales that you can use to your advantage.
Hmm.
And I think this is one of them. Learning how to kind of advocate for yourself in the professional sphere. I think it's a positive.
Hmm.
And I think it's a really important point that you made.
Yeah, I think when I first got into like a brand, I was like, I'm not going to do marketing. Because I didn't want to be like the salesy person, right? I
There
was
you
like,
go.
I'm not going to do marketing. I'm just going to create things and then the people will find them.
Yeah, build a better
And
mousetrap, right?
right. And I think like, and that's something that kind of makes me really sad about kind of academia and scientists, right? Because we do the exact same thing when we publish papers, right? Like we publish our papers and we're like, okay, I did my job. And I think when you switch from marketing being about sales to marketing being about how can I help people and be in the right space at the right time. And that's really what it should be about, right? Like my whole brand is about helping people.
Mhm.
If I'm not going to help you, like don't come to me, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm here to help people. And that's what it should be about in the end is just making sure that, and that's the same thing as a scientist. Like if you're going to do all the work, publish the paper, right? Like you should want that paper to be helping people, to be getting
Mhm.
to the people who need it. And the journal isn't always going to do that for you. Someone searching Google Scholar is not always going to find it. And so it is on you to kind of promote it, right? It's on you to be like, hey, to anyone who needs this is what I did. This is what I'm, this is how I can help people. Hey, if you have questions, let me know. Like, I'd love to start a conversation about it and things like that. And so
Mhm.
when we think of it like that, I think it changes what marketing kind of feels like.
Yeah. I agree. I agree totally. And same thing also. If you are, let's say, marketing yourself and promoting your brand as a candidate for positions,
Hmm.
same thing. You want to show whichever lab, institute, whatever, that you're going to be a helpful element of their
Hmm.
team. So it's kind of the same,
It's the exact same thing. Yeah.
same thing. Yeah. Now, about grad school coach, science grad school
Okay.
coach.
Yeah.
Uh, I wonder if you, from the experience you have, if there are uh, like things that come up, you know, repeatedly, like people who come. First, do people come to you? Do you? How does it work? Do you? How can I say? Offer services through universities, departments, or is it just around you that you do that? I'm just curious of how it works, how
Yeah.
the concept works.
So, Science Grad School Coach is mainly to help people learn how to do research. So, even from the beginning, developing skills
Okay.
to create ideas. Like, how do you find novel ideas? How do you create a research plan, collect your data? How do you write papers?
Hmm.
Things like that. So, I actually don't work through any universities right now or anything like that. It's something that I would love to do in the future, but I haven't quite made those connections yet. So I primarily, so if you go to the link below, there's two different guides that you can sign up to get. So the first one's a 30-day research jumpstart guide. It helps you if
Okay.
you're just starting in your research to be able to develop those ideas and start collecting data in 30 days. And then the second one is a scientific paper checklist. And
Okay.
so right now I have two basic courses that kind of help students who want to work through it, basically based off those guides. So it goes more in depth, gives you things like worksheets and other things to really help you build more and develop those research skills. So that's where I am right now with how I help people. I also do coaching services primarily for scientific writing. So that's kind of what the Science Grad School Coach brand is right now. Eventually, I would love to do like workshops for students through universities and things like that. But that's kind of future plan, and I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah. So people come directly to you, basically. That's what happens. And so, okay, my question then becomes, when people knock at your door, is there like 2 or 3 things that commonly they're saying, this thing is not working for me, I'm not being able to hone this skill? Is there like pain points that are typical that you could say?
Yeah, so I find the 2 biggest pain points, which is why I have my 2 guides, is the first one I get probably most often is like, I don't know how to write this paper. Like how
the
I have
process.
data. I know I need a published paper, but like bridging that gap is just so difficult. And like I totally get it, because when I was in grad school and I wrote my first paper, like I tell this story all the time, but I went to a Starbucks for 8 hours one day to try and write this paper. And I kept looking at paper after paper, looking at the introduction and how do you write this? And I wrote 1 paragraph in 8 hours, and it was awful. Like I ended up deleting it later because it was so bad. And so that was like a skill that I had to develop, and analyzing how I did things and stuff like that. So I eventually created that into a guide and into a course, so that like now I can write papers in like a weekend, 4 hours, and I can write a paper, data to paper. So that's one of the biggest pain points that I see people come. And then the second one is I don't know how to create an idea, right? Like, so in science, I would say that initially your like advisor tends to give you your first initial project. And then after that, you kind of need to create your own ideas. And when I started grad school, I was terrified about creating an idea. I was like, I can't do that. Like, that seems so hard, right? So I think the fear is a lot in our heads. And I think I had to realize that I always had this connection that a research idea meant a research product. I felt like I needed to make something, right? And so having to like switch to be like, okay, I need a question that I'm answering, and how do I figure out if that's novel and publishable? And so I'm in Facebook groups all the time, and people are like, please give me a research idea in this. And I'm like, let's develop the skill so that you can, so like now, like I can probably on command, you can give me a topic I know about. I'm like, oh, here's a question, go research that, right? And it's about just developing that skill of, can I create a research idea? And that, I think those are the 2 biggest pain points I see when people, contact me and are like, can you please help me with this? So yeah.
Well, I would have liked to have met you, a bunch of years ago, because definitely it's if you've never you've never done it when you start grad school. Usually, depending,
Right.
some people come out of masters with and who are lucky with also the supervision they got and the opportunities they had to do research. But it can be daunting to have this blank page, and it's not just creative writing, it's about the science,
right?
And also finding a new question can be scary too, in that sense. I find that's super interesting, especially for people who are starting. Yeah. Now, the other question that I have for you has to do with your personal experience. We've talked about your experience as a candidate, how that evolved, but as someone who is helping others. So a lot of people that I, in this link, in the academic Twitter, academic LinkedIn, there's so much goodwill of people out there who want to give back and help.
Yeah.
And this podcast is hopefully, and I like to think of it like that, as part of this universe of the people who have gone through grad school and want to help people. But yeah, how has that impacted your view or your life as a researcher? The fact that now you're also helping people who are lacking some sort of knowledge maybe, but also who maybe just need to have some pep talk, or who
Yeah.
just need to learn to kind of value themselves, or be able to at least express their value in a different way. It's not every researcher that has that experience.
Yeah. So I think having gone and actually like worked with people and been like, okay, let's work through your struggles and things like that, I think it really kind of changes your view both in how you help people and then also like in how you do research. And I think particularly in how you okay, there's a couple different thoughts happening at one time. Sorry.
Go ahead, take your time.
Like one thought is, and if people are out there and are in their PhD, like think about this with me, because if you are later in your PhD and you're working with someone else, one thing you'll realize is how far you've actually come. And I think a lot of times we always look, a lot of us are future paced, right? We're always like, oh, I can't wait till graduation. I can't wait till all of this. And then you go and you work with someone who's like, because I was at one point, like, I was like, okay, what's a mass spectrometer? Like, I don't know, right? And I'm over here like explaining it to people and like having no issues with that. And so that's such an important thing to realize, is even if you're early stage, like you didn't know what you know now 2 months ago. And so I think that's always so important, is to realize that you are growing as a researcher throughout the entire process. Even though you may feel like you're lacking and having imposter syndrome, like it is a training position, you are growing through that. But I also think it kind of makes you always think about how to break everything down into its simplest form. So whenever you're doing something, like now I always think, how would I explain this to someone else? And like that's just like an automatic trigger, right? And I'm like, okay, if I'm doing this, how do I break it down so that, and like that also helps you, but then it helps you to be able to explain it. And really, like a lot of times it makes you seem like an expert when you like still don't feel like an expert. Like I don't feel like an expert in a lot of things, right? But it's like I know I can like look at something and be like, okay, what you need to do is answer these 2 or 3 questions, and then we're going to mold it into this. So I feel like that's definitely changed how I am as a researcher. And I think it's also changed like how I view failure. Because like, I would never say I'm a perfectionist, but I don't like to fail. And so I think being able to teach other people and stuff like that, and realizing like failure is it's just moving forward one step, right? Like, how not to do it now. And so, but I also think being a researcher has drastically improved how I work in my business, because in that same point of failure is like, now when I do things in my business, I see them as experiments, right? So if something doesn't have the data I get from something isn't that great, okay, that's giving me more information so that I can make the best product possible in the end.
No, I love it, and I think it's interesting. I think mentorship, because you found a way to, in the end, include mentorship in your life as a researcher in a way. And I don't know if it makes sense to you. And I feel that given the way universities and large universities are, and large research groups are built, finding mentorship can be difficult. And I find it great that someone like you is out there saying, look, I can help you in this and in this, and these things will help you then first find your value and grow as a researcher. And I don't know, I wish I had someone to play that role in that way, and so I really like your project, and the fact that you're pursuing that. And the second thing that I found really inspiring in this conversation, and we're kind of reaching the end, but it is to see that in these few years, because you said it's not too long ago, you've kind of showed this maturation of Alana, from the graduate student, introverted, not able really to to present her brand and to promote herself and to be findable and visible, to learning how to do it, and to eventually come to the point of now I can teach other people how to do it. And I just love this kind of nice kind of arc of a story. And
Yeah,
yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, I was going to say, and again, I think given the time frame, this is just the beginning, and I'm sure you're
Hmm.
going to be able to develop the business even more, and eventually possibly working with universities and offering it at another scale to people out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really excited about it, and I think, talking about like my journey from like now then to now, like even me being on this podcast is like a
Mhm.
huge step, cuz like I never wanted to reach out. I was like, "Oh, when I'm of value, they'll reach out to me." Right? And I think we like kind of think of that as like academics too, right? Like we don't go after the awards. We don't go after all this stuff. We're like, when I'm of value, they'll, and it's like they may love
Mhm.
you, but they don't know you exist.
Exactly.
So like that's such a huge thing. And when you feel like you're not developing or anything like that, like just look back like a year or 2 years and you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I am such a different person now. And I am so thankful for that. And so yeah, I think it's just such a been a crazy journey, but I'm really interested in seeing how it kind of develops from now.
Yeah, well, and I'll be interested in seeing how it develops too, because I think it's a good project, and it's noble, and yeah, I do want to to witness it grow. Now, Elena, yeah, sadly we're really reaching the end of the interview. I don't know if there's anything you want to before sharing maybe your Twitter handle, if there's
Hmm.
something coming up on your side that you want to promote, because I'm gonna put your site here again, and I will share the link in the show notes, so people who are watching, it's scrolling below the screen, sciencegradschoolcoach.com/podcast, but it'll be in the show notes anyway if you weren't able to take note. But is there something on your side you want to propose, you want to promote?
Yeah, so if you just go to that site and get my guides, it'll get you on my email list, so you'll be able to know anytime something's coming out for anything like that. There's not specifically anything I'm promoting right now, but you can always get my free guides at the link.
Perfect. And now, that one last thing, if there's someone who's listening who maybe feels a little bit invisible, feels that they're not, they've started their PhD, but they don't feel that they've like uh, grown into it yet. Is there a word of encouragement or an exercise or something that you can share with them in this last minute to kind of help them, you know, find find their value, and
Hmm.
also see things maybe in a more positive, uh, with a more positive mindset, starting today, let's say.
Okay, well, that was I will say, if you feel like that, if you feel like you're invisible, and I think like the biggest thing, if you feel like you're lost, you're inadequate, or if you don't belong, I was you 5 years ago.
Same
Right?
here.
Yeah, like I was you. I felt like everyone else had it together and I didn't. And what I've come to realize is no one has it together. We're all figuring it out as we go along, and in a year you won't remember how you feel right now, and you'll feel the same thing in a year from now, right? Which like
Yeah.
is not very like motivating, but I think it's also the power in it, right? There's nothing you could have done to feel differently right now. You just like, this is how you feel because you're on this journey. And so I think recognizing that it's not a reflection of who you are or whether you belong or not, it's just because you're doing something new, and all of us feel like we shouldn't be here when we're doing something new,
Mhm.
where we feel like we should be here when we're super confident and we've been doing it for 10 years. And I think it's just showing that you're growing and you're going into something. I don't know if that's like the motivation people
No,
want.
no. Well, but I think it's very realistic, and it's very sound motivation. It's a growing process, and yeah,
Hmm.
that's it. You, how can how can I put it another way? I don't know. I'm thinking of. It's funny. I'm a biologist, so I'm thinking of kind of bones growing or teeth coming out or whatever. And
Yeah.
it's an unknown until they pop out, and then they're still growing. They still can't do their work very well in the first,
Hmm.
when they first come out. I don't know if it's a really good metaphor,
And it's
but
painful when
it is.
they're like first coming out. It's painful.
There you
You're
go.
just going through growing pains. Like that's what it is.
Thank you, Elena, for making my metaphor work.
We got
And
this.
so I think one last thing that I want to say is, and tell me, Elena, if people were touched or or something resonated during our conversation, I think they can reach out to you. And you said
Mhm.
it's on Twitter mostly, right?
Yeah, Twitter is the easiest way to contact me. So it's at Sci Grad Coach, SCI grad and then coach,
Perfect.
shortened. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me there. I check my messages fairly regularly. So you can always tweet me or message me there.
Yeah. And yeah, for people who are just listening on the podcast, I can tell you, Elena is a very smiley and warm person. Don't be afraid of reaching out to her, and to share your story, to learn more about hers, and or to just say thank you for sharing something that resonated during the
Yeah.
conversation. Elena, thank you so much for having been on Papa PhD. This was a great conversation, and
I'm so glad. Yay.
yeah, and inspiring. And I think people, especially people who are starting and are in that, in finding themselves, finding their pace, finding their voice in graduate school or in research, they're gonna have a lot of nuggets to bring home from our conversation and from what you shared. So thank you.
Yay. Yes. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you. And this is it. So this is officially the end of the recording of the podcast. We can talk a little bit more here on the live, but thank you. This was really great. And one thing that's interesting to me is that time frame that's not so long, but
Yeah.
in which you kind of were able to showcase all the stages of evolution
Yeah.
of the young scientist.
And it was not it like you said, it's growing pains. Like the
Mm,
entire and like I'm still growing so much. I love how like we want to see the story, like the arc, like we want the end point.
yeah.
And it's like the realization that there is no end point, right? Like the end point's when we die, right?
Yes.
Even though that's real grim.
I was going to say exactly that. That's the only real endpoint.
Yeah, like that's the end point. And it's like right now, like I'm learning so much every day, so much about myself. And it's just like I'm and I think the most important thing is like I'm so much happier now.
Hmm.
Even though I'm not doing what I thought would make me happy now. Just because I'm me. Like I'm
Yeah.
not trying to go after all these things. I'm not really future pacing anymore. I'm just kind of enjoying my current life as it is. Um, so it's been a really interesting ride. And I know that 2 years from now it's probably gonna seem like this was like the beginning,
The
right?
beginning, of course, of course. No,
Yeah.
it's interesting. It's this the way our brain works with time. Often doesn't help us, and blocks us, even can block us because we're afraid of the future or because
Hmm.
we're attached to the past. And if you learn that it's a process, growing pains are just part of it. It's just actually
Hmm.
confirmation that you're moving forward.
Right.
Then I think it helps because you can say, okay, oh, I have growing pains. I'm growing. Oh, this is awesome.
Yeah, like when
Versus,
you start seeing imposter syndrome as the indication that you're at the beginning of a journey.
yeah,
Like that when I started making that like, oh my gosh, my imposter syndrome in my business, like all the time, like if you're over here like wondering, you know, am I good enough to do it? I have a PhD where I did research, where I wrote over 12 papers in 3 years, right? And I'm over here like, who am I to teach people how to do research? Right? Like, that's the reality because but like, do I have valuable things to offer? Yes. Do I feel like an imposter half the time? Yes.
Yes.
And it's just because like I'm still sort of new to it. Like my brand's been about a year. I think May is when I started my channel. October is when I started this actual brand. So
Mhm.
my brand's been around about a year, and I'm still new to it. Like figuring out how to actually help people has been a journey in its own, because you got to
Mhm.
figure out what they want. How do they want to be helped is
Yeah.
different than how can I like
How you think
just
they want to
helping
be
them.
helped. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's been a
Very
journey.
interesting. Elena, this was great. I really had a fun time. It was inspiring, and yeah, I think a lot of people who watch or listen gonna have, especially the ones who are starting, like I said, are gonna have a lot to take in and
Yeah.
to just. And I think what's cool is people. It's easier to teach some lessons by through stories, and you shared your story, but also to inspire people with other people with the
Hmm.
and in this case, uh, I really enjoyed how everything's so fresh, how you're still in it, and you still doing you're still postdoctoral researcher, and you were able to um, kind of give us this rewind of your process and how
Yeah.
what brought you to wanting or being able to help people going through the process. I just love that.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was such a good conversation, and being able to share my story and hopefully help other people that are like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I belong. Cause I mean, that was me a few years
Hmm.
ago. So realize, that's what I always like to do when I was first starting, is like look at other people that had made it past where I was, and hearing them talk about, they felt the same thing I felt or I'm feeling now, and then it's like, okay, I can make it, right? And so I love sharing that for other people, and hopefully
Hmm.
being able to do the same thing.
Well, I think this was a great, like almost 1 hour condensate of all of that. I hope I was able to ask enough
Yeah,
questions,
great.
and yeah, I think again, I think let's keep in touch, and I'm curious to
Yeah,
see where your things are going.
thank you so
Um,
much.
Elena, thank you. I'm going to now end the broadcast here on the live streams. But yeah, if you maybe stick around, I'm just gonna pop us back into the green room.
Yeah.
But for everyone watching, thanks for having been here, be it live or later on. And yeah, comments. Say something. Say thank you to Elena. Anything that'd be great. Thanks, Elena. I'm going
Yeah.
to just stop this then.